Hello and welcome. It's Ricky Schoonover with 8Z Real Estate, and you are tuned in to the Denver Homes Market Report, which is Denver's monthly real estate podcast. We are in our 6th season. This happens to be episode 3. If you've missed the first couple of episodes, the first one we talked about bullet points of what I bring to the table for my clients, for my sellers. And then last month, we went into some bullet points of what I bring to the table that makes me unique for my buyers. So those are my first 2 episodes. If you haven't heard those 2 episodes, go back and check them out. Very good information in there. You know, there's a bunch of realtors out there, 26 some odd thousand of us here in Colorado. And so what sets me apart? Why do you hire Ricky Schoonover? And there's a whole set of different things that are unique to me that I bring to the table for my clients, whether we're working on a listing where we're selling your property, or I'm working with you in a buyer capacity, or if we're doing both, if we're selling one home and buying another. There's some unique properties that I bring to the table that not all realtors bring to the table. So if you haven't checked that out, I do encourage you to do so. And then for this week, I have a unique situation for this week. You know, I have clients, we're going to call them Misty and DC. I'm not going to use their actual names, but Misty, you're out there, you know who you are. DC, you're out there, you know who you are. Fantastic couple. I've known them for a number of years. Helped them purchase a townhouse some years ago. Helped them sell that townhouse. Father had passed away not too long ago, and I'm helping them with getting that townhouse sold. And now I'm also representing them to purchase a condo. So these are clients of mine that I've known over the years, and I know, love, and trust them. They know and love and trust me. But we had a situation come up. And it was a difficult situation. And so I wanted to bring that up. Like I was telling you, I had my first episode here in season 6. Where we talked about what I bring for sellers. We had another one here where we talked about what I bring to buyers. And in this particular situation, we were going through a couple of transactions. You know, I'm helping them sell their townhouse that their father once owned. And I'm also helping them buy a condo. And the situation came up on the townhouse when I'm selling. And it's a condo as well. It's a townhouse style condominium. But situation came up where we have a buyer who's a cash buyer. And so that in itself comes with some benefits. We don't have to worry about an appraisal. We don't have to worry about, you know, the lender diving into the HOA documents all that tightly. And we don't have to worry about final loan approval. So those are some things in today's market, especially in the condo market, that are being very, very scrutinized. The lenders are really diving into the condominium's master insurance policy and checking their hail deductible and making sure that's a 5% or less hail deductible. It's really important. If it's above that, it doesn't meet the Fannie Mae guidelines, and then that loan has to be like a different type of loan. You can't just go with the normal Fannie Freddie loan that most people use. And with those other loans, they also end up having a little bit higher interest rate and higher costs. So in this situation, we had a buyer who's cash, who did a home inspection, came back with quite a few things on this home inspection they wanted my sellers, Misty and DC, to address. And I was really pushing him like, hey, let's not lose this buyer. Let's not lose this buyer. Let's get these things done. You know, I was getting some friction with DC about, you know, hey, if you're going to have an electrician there already to do X, Y, Z, just have him do this as well. He's already there. Have him put in that outlet. Have him fix that GFCI. You know, have him fix this. And he's like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm only going to do what I'm agreeing to do, which was a major thing. It was actually changing out an old Federal Pacific panel. So he was already spending thousands of dollars and didn't want to spend $1 more. I understood that fact, but I also didn't want to lose this buyer and him get cold feet and walk out, and then we're back to square one. So that was kind of where I was pushing him a little bit. And then we had a situation where Misty called me and said, Ricky, you know, we love you and we really want you to be there for us, but we're really feeling like, you know, you really have more of the buyers back on this. Like, we just want you to fight for us. We want you to feel like you're our advocate. And right now we're not feeling that. And it really hit me hard. It really did, because I was doing nothing but fighting for them. And what I wasn't doing, and what I recognized, is that I wasn't doing a good enough job explaining to them the hows I was fighting for them and the why I was fighting for them, like what I was trying to help them avoid. And so we set up a we were going to do a phone call meeting, but their power went out where they're living. They're living in an apartment, and the power went out in the entire building. So doing a phone meeting really wasn't going to be all that impactful. And it was raining that night, but I called them and said, hey, you know what? What if I just pack up my car? I know this is going to be a difficult conversation. Let me just drive to you guys. We'll find a place that we can hang out, and we'll talk this through. So we did that. But in the meantime, as this was sort of materializing, what else happened was one of their neighbors in that same complex where we're selling the townhouse had gone under contract. And I had had a phone call from first the appraiser saying, hey, what's going on with your property? Because you're under you're under contract. You were listed for higher than this one. How's your appraisal going? And I explained to him that we had a cash deal. And then after that appraiser called me a few days later, that house went back on market, and the buyer's broker called me and said, hey, what's going on with your deal? And how are you getting through the appraisal? Because we came in really, really low on our appraisal. And in my mind, I'm thinking, this is exactly what I was trying to help my clients avoid. So it really gave me some, not ammunition, because it wasn't, it was emotional, but it wasn't like angry emotion. It was more like, help us. Like, why are you not fighting for us? Why does it seem like you're fighting for that buyer? So anyway, we went out and we met face to face, and me, Misty, and DC, we all got together. And I was like, look, guys, and I'm going to have to do a reenactment here because this just came to me as we were meeting, as we sat down at this table. So I'm going to do a little bit of a reenactment, but this is basically what happened. It just came to me. I don't know what. It wasn't anything I rehearsed or anything I pulled out of a movie line or whatever, but it really did feel like that moment. So I've said, before I start talking, because it seems like my mouth has gotten me in some trouble here. So before I start talking, I want to hear from you guys. What's going on? And one of the main things, they were talking about a condo that they had put an offer in. We didn't win because they had gotten a cash buyer. That had fallen out of contract, and it came back into our lap where we had an opportunity to put an offer in. And we did put in an offer, but then the sellers on the other side sent us a counter offer. And with the counter offer, they also said, hey, there was a flood that they told us about. There was a leak, but they didn't really explain to us like gravity of this leak was actually quite a flood in this house. So we got a lot of disclosures and things like that. And DC was thinking that he was on the hook. Like, we already wrote the offer. He's having to buy this place, and now he's finding all this stuff out, and he was just smoke coming from the ears. See, that's what he was really upset about. And so in the beginning of that conversation, first of all, I was like, okay guys, it seems like a lot of your anxiety and a lot of your anger are about this property that we put the offer in on. I said, we're not committed to it, like, at all. We are not committed to that property at all. They sent us a counter offer, so right now that's a piece of paper, and until we sign the counter offer or we send over our own counter offer, that's just a piece of paper. So that kind of like helped diffuse that meeting right away. A lot of his anger and a lot of his anxiety was that we had a day and a half earlier written an offer and submitted it on on a condo, but we had received back a counter offer. So we were not in any way, shape, or form committed to purchasing that property, and we'd gotten a lot of disclosures since then about that leak. And so my buyers were thinking like, oh my God, we have to buy this property even though we don't want it now because of all these things that are going on with it. Well, it turns out they still did want the property. But let's get back to this moment. I listened to them speak first, and then I was like, you know what, guys? It's easy to be a good agent. It is. It's easy. You write an offer, you negotiate back and forth, whether you're working with a buyer or working with a seller. You're working with a seller, you receive the offer, you go over it with the seller. We go through that week where we get the inspection objections. We sort of negotiate those back and forth with the buyer and come up with a happy medium. I said, it's good. It's easy to be a good realtor when things are all going well, when all the communication is in line and you just go on to the closing table and everything else. I said, but you know what? When things go wrong, when communications somehow get askew, or when things don't go right, when you fall out of contract, and things get difficult, and conversations like we're getting ready to have here, these difficult conversations come up, that's when great realtors emerge. That really is. When things go wrong, that is when a great realtor emerges. And I'll tell you what, you Misty, and you, DC, you guys have a great realtor, and I'm going to prove it to you tonight. And that was sort of what I said to them. It's kind of paraphrased at this point, but it was something to that effect. And so then I went into my meeting, and you could just feel Misty on this side. I could just feel her, like she just had a smile. She was just like, okay, we got this. It just gave her that bit of confidence, and it gave me that confidence too to get into this somewhat of a difficult conversation. But then we got into it, and DC had brought up, well, hey, there was this one situation where we have to wait for this probate, and you kind of forgot about that until we brought it back up. And I was like, no, I didn't forget about it at all. I wasn't that I forgot about it. It was that we had this communication where I had sent you the letter from title company saying, hey, we had to wait for this probate. And then I had a conversation with our lender partner, and our lender partners are like, well, if you have a will and everybody's in agreement, you may not have to wait for that period, but talk to your attorney. So then I reached out back back to DC and said, hey, I spoke to, I know we got that letter from title. I did speak to our lender partner, and here's what they said. They said, maybe we don't have to wait, but check with the attorney. You guys have an attorney for the probate thing, so check with the attorney. And then 3 or 4 days later, DC had reached out to me and said, hey, my sister, because his sister and him are also both on this townhouse. So my sister spoke to the attorney and the deed's been recorded. I was like, all right, great. So I just thought at that point that the probate thing was solved. Like that was, the communication was like, there was no reason for me to question that wasn't solving that issue. So we got past that and they're like, oh, okay, I see where that came from. That totally makes sense. And then the next thing was, it feels like, Ricky, you're really advocating for the buyer on the townhouse. Like you want us to fix all these things. And I was like, guys, hold on. I don't give a rat's behind. I said this. I don't give a rat's behind about this buyer, really. I said, I mean, we're in real estate, right? We do need to be amicable and we do have to be professional and above board and ethical. I said, but when it comes down to it, you are my clients. I am working for you. I am your advocate. And I said, here's the deal, guys. I said 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago, whatever it was, I said the appraiser on your neighbor. You know the neighbor over there that went to market like right after we did for almost the same price, even though they're not remodeled and we are completely remodeled? I said that was probably frustrating to you. And they're like, yeah, because she's getting the same price. I was like, well, that appraiser on that property called me. So they had a buyer on the line there who had a loan, who was going to get an appraisal, and the appraiser called me because they were having a hard time coming to that valuation that they were at. And then after that appraiser called me and I told him, I said, hey, we have a cash buyer, so we're not doing an appraisal. Doesn't apply to us. Then that buyer's agent also called me and said, hey, what's going on with your property? You've been under contract and we just fell out because our appraisal came in way low. And he didn't tell me the exact number. But then as I'm sitting there speaking in this conversation with Misty and DC's like, you know what? That lady knows my sister. And she texted her what her appraisal came in at. And it was below $400,000. And so I told him, I said, guys, this just proves my point. I was not advocating for that buyer, but our buyer is a cash buyer. And the buyer that we have is willing to wait for this probate thing that came back up that we have to wait till close. And they don't have a loan. They're not doing an appraisal. They're not having to go get all the HOA documents and send them into the lender where they're going to scrutinize their hail deductibles and everything else. And we don't have to worry about the appraisal, the big thing. So I was trying to hold on to this buyer for you guys. I was trying to get you to keep this buyer happy, which we did, to keep this buyer happy. So they didn't walk away from this deal, because if they walked away, we were going to be back to square one, where we didn't have a buyer. We're going to have to go back on the market. And we're probably going to have to fix a lot of these things anyways, because any buyer is going to ask for these things to get fixed. So I was not advocating for their buyer. I was advocating for you that we don't lose this buyer, because what this buyer is bringing to the table, which is a cash deal, and avoids all these other complications that a lot of other people were dealing with. And they're like, light bulbs went off, right? Misty and DC were like, we get it. We understand. I said, I don't want you to be this person. I won't use her name, but I don't want you to be that person. I don't want you to be the one that now goes back to market because you couldn't appraise, or back to market because the HOA has a hail deductible that the lender doesn't like, or some other financials, or not enough reserves, or whatever it is that they're going to dig into their HOAs. I was like, sure, our buyer, we provide them all the documentation, and they're of course going to look through it, but they're not, they're not a lender. They're not looking at all these other HOAs. They're looking at all these other problems. They're just looking at it is this HOA, sufficient enough? And more than likely we're okay. And we'd already been past all of our inspection period. We've already been past all of our disclosure period. So I knew we were all set on that. I said, but I was trying to get you guys to avoid what this other neighbor over here just went through, where they went on to the market. They got a buyer who was buying, like most, 90% of the people out there are going to get a mortgage. They have to go through that loan approval process. Of course you get a pre-approval by them looking at your financials, initial financials, but then there's a whole nother bit of scrutiny as you move through the contract with appraisal, HOA documents, hail deductibles, final loan approval, all those other milestones that have to be hit. And when you have a cash buyer, you don't have those. So I was trying to keep you guys to keep our buyer happy, not because I cared for the buyer, but because I cared about you. Because what if we did fall out of contract and then we didn't appraise for even $400,000 when we're under contract for more than that? You would have lost money, like $20,000. So they understood that I was advocating for them, but I wasn't doing a good enough job explaining why I was advocating for them or how I was advocating for them. So it was just an important lesson that I wanted to bring to you guys today. Sometimes if you feel like your realtor is not advocating on your behalf and you feel like they're fighting for somebody else, ask them. Let them come to you and explain to you, maybe on a deeper level, what they're really trying to help you avoid or what they're really trying to help you accomplish. And in my case, I was trying to help them accomplish more money. And I was trying to help them avoid losing that buyer, not so much because of the buyer, but because that buyer being a cash buyer, losing because of some technicality in the HOA documents or the appraisal or something of that effect, or the final loan approval. And so I was trying to protect them from losing that. And that's really where that came in. We had a big hug, big group, reset. We did end up pursuing that condo, and we are under contract. We haven't closed yet, but we're under contract. We got to close the townhouse, and then we get to close this one. But I wanted to bring that for this podcast. It's a real world situation. It's ongoing right now, but we are under contract. Knock on wood, nothing happens. And I want to just bring you that scenario that I am indeed fighting for my clients as sellers on their townhouse and as buyers for their condo. But sometimes it might not feel like that. And if it doesn't feel like that, reach out to your realtor, or if you're working with me, reach out to me and let me explain where I'm coming from, because it totally made sense where they were coming from, and I had empathy for them. And they also, on the flip side, saw where I was coming from and how I was indeed fighting for them, and they just didn't realize it. So lesson learned for both parties. And like I said, it got emotional, but it wasn't like angry emotional. They just wanted to know that I was fighting for them, and I just wanted them to know that I was fighting for them. And when we were able to meet that in the middle, and I was able to explain to them where I was coming from, and they were able to explain to me what their perception was, we were able to reconcile that and move forward. So communication is key, mindset is key, and looking forward to moving on to closing with these clients. But again, this is Ricky Schoonover with 8Z Real Estate. We're going to close out today's podcast. We're about at our 16, 17 minute here, but just wanted to bring that real world situation to you. This is season 6, episode 3. If you haven't listened to episode 1, please go back and do that. Please go back and listen to episode 2. And now hopefully you're listening to episode 3. Hit that subscribe button, which I think is right there, or it's right there on my YouTube channel. And thanks for tuning in. This is Denver's monthly real estate podcast, the Denver Homes Market Report. And this is Ricky Schoonover, your local realtor with 8Z Real Estate. If you have any questions, give me a call, 720-688-5110. Or you can go to my website, denverhomesmarket.com. All right, thank you so much. One last thing here, 1941 Wabash Street, right here in Denver, just south of the Central Park neighborhood up there. Got that one on the market. We just lowered the price. We were at $425. We are now at $400 even. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. Comes with a washer and dryer, and has a beautiful 2-car garage detached there with alley access. So give me a call about that one. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath with a 2-car garage at $400,000 even, and it's here in Denver. I'd love to get you to take a look at that property, 1941 Wabash. If you go to my website, denverhomesmarket.com, go up to the featured listings. It'll be right there. Check it out. All right, give me a call if you have any questions, guys. I will check in with you next month. Once again, Ricky Schoonover, 720-688-5110. Thank you so much, and have a great month.